7 years of my life were dedicated to that company. 7. Sleepless nights, postponed vacations, contracts saved at the last minute, crises solved with a single phone call. And in the end, I was discarded like a smudged piece of paper. The new CEO didn't even know my last name properly. He had barely arrived and already decided he needed to cut the fat. Yes, that's what he called me. Fat. In front of everyone. In front of the team I had trained myself. In front of the directors who used to knock on my door for help with the most delicate contracts. Right there, before them, he pointed at me and said my salary was an unnecessary luxury. They got rid of me like someone wipes a stain off a table. Fast, with no explanation. They didn't even let me finish my coffee. And him? He laughed. Said any intern could do what I did. But what he didn't know was that there was a contract that could only be renewed with my signature. My name is Monica Byrne. I'm 30 years old, and this is the story of how they called me a cost and saw me return as a key player. Working at Delcor wasn't easy, but for me, it was an honor. It was the place where I could prove my worth. I knew that stepping into that office meant I'd have to sweat. I never expected it to be easy, but each challenge made me feel like I was getting closer to achieving my goal. It wasn't about glamour or fame. It was much more than that. It was dedication. It was blood and sweat. I started at the company as a junior analyst, a role that seemed smaller than it really was. I was one of the last of the new hires, the quietest, the most observant. At my desk, the work seemed simple. Review contracts, check clauses, verify details. But I quickly realized there was something much more complex beneath the surface. Something no one else was willing to uncover. I earned little. Very little, to be honest. And I knew others talked about it, about how my position was just a start. Sometimes I heard the whispers at the coffee machine or the snickers among the finance team. Oh, poor Monica, she's going to bust her head with those huge clauses. Just say okay and move on. I once overheard sarcastically as I walked to my desk with another stack of complex documents in my hands. But I didn't care. At that moment, all that mattered was learning. And to learn, you had to take on the work no one else wanted to do. I was forced to deal with contracts dozens of pages long, full of legal jargon that read like a riddle. Many of my colleagues would just sign and move on, but not me. I'd lose myself in them for hours, reading, rereading, searching for loopholes, catching details that at first seemed irrelevant. Each word, each number became a new code to decipher. My mind was wired to understand those contracts like puzzles, a unique language that few could interpret. At first, no one noticed me. I was invisible. I was there, but I wasn't. My department colleagues, who gathered around their coffees and lunches, never invited me to their conversations. I stayed at my desk, alone, surrounded by piles of papers. But it wasn't loneliness I felt. It was the joy of problem solving. It was the feeling that I was doing something no one else could, something that could turn the tide in the company's favor. And little by little, that's how my reputation began to form. In 2 years, I became a reference. No one gave me the title, no one congratulated me publicly. I didn't want that. I didn't need it. But when someone had a difficult contract, the first person they looked for was me. That alone was a victory. When someone had a question about specific clauses or needed a quick analysis, the question was always the same. Monica, can you take a quick look at this? I always did. And I always solved it. More and more, my presence became indispensable. In 4 years, the promotion came. I was named manager, a dream that seemed far off in the beginning, when I was just an analyst with a notebook full of scribbles and a mind hungry to learn. Now I held the keys to many critical contracts, the ones that supported the company's very foundation. I was the one maintaining relationships with the suppliers who powered most of our operations. I negotiated with the biggest players, but always quietly. I never needed the spotlight to feel my worth. I knew what I was worth, and what I did was vital. Even so, I was never featured in internal emails. I wasn't at the year-end parties. I didn't get flowers on International Women's Day. But at crucial moments, when the company was on the edge, people came to me, and my name was typed urgently into emails. Mo, do you know if the renewal clause has any lock-in? Or, Monica, there's a problem with the supplier contract. Can you take a look? And I knew. I always knew. Even when the rest of the team was lost, or deadlines seemed impossible, I already had the answer. I had already read that contract, analyzed those details. Everything was in my mind, ready to be resolved. Deep down, I was the kind of person who only got noticed when she was missing. When someone needed a signature, a solution, a final touch, that's when they remembered me. I knew my work was quiet, but essential. Yet there's one thing about being a silent gear in a giant machine. When you're gone, the whole thing grinds to a halt. He arrived on a Monday. Slim-fit suit, a vibrant blue, and that MBA accent that sounded like it had been lifted straight from a corporate leadership manual. It was clear he had come prepared to transform everything around him. The room was full of people anxious to see what this new CEO, with the air of a young executive, had to offer. He climbed the makeshift stage like a luxury car salesman, beaming, with that spark in his eyes that radiated confidence. "Folks, we need to be more agile, more modern, lean, streamlined," he exclaimed, gesturing expansively, as if giving a pitch to investors. His tone was assertive, and his energy seemed to electrify the room. I was sitting in the back row, watching closely. It wasn't hard to see that he was trying to win everyone over, but something unsettled me. He spoke as though he had full command of the situation, yet he didn't even know half the team's names. Worse still, he barely made eye contact with anyone. As he boasted about his ideas of agility and modernity, people around him exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some whispered, others fell silent, but everyone was clearly disoriented by the hollow speech. Internally, I kept thinking, what doesn't he know? What hasn't he realized yet? In his first week, he made a drastic decision. An entire department was eliminated. The news hit like a bomb. The employees were let go without warning. They simply disappeared. In the second week, he did something even more unthinkable. He terminated 3 supplier contracts that had taken me months to negotiate with carefully crafted clauses to protect the company. Complex contracts with details that required deep understanding of the sector and business relationships were tossed aside like crumpled paper. "Monica, these contracts are no longer advantageous for us," he told me in a meeting, pointing at the papers with irritating nonchalance. I tried to explain. "But you don't see that these clauses protect us from potential litigation down the line? It's not just about price. It's about security." But he simply shook his head, as if my explanation was irrelevant, and with a self-satisfied smile shoved the contracts into a drawer. Agility, modernity, it's all easy when you don't care about what's at stake, I thought. Then, in the third week, came the verdict. He called me in for a quick meeting late in the afternoon, the kind that always signals something is wrong. I was in my office, finishing a final check of some contracts, when he walked in. "Monica, I need to be direct with you." He started with the tone of someone delivering a big revelation. I already knew. Something in his posture told me this conversation was about my future at the company. "I've looked at the numbers and you're an unnecessary cost," he said with an almost mechanical coldness, as if reading from a script. "The company needs to be leaner. I'm sure you understand." Those words hit like a direct blow, not just because of how brutal they were, but because he genuinely seemed to believe he was being pragmatic and efficient. I, who had worked for 7 years at that company, who had been key in moments of crisis and complex negotiations, was reduced to an unnecessary cost. "What do you mean by unnecessary cost? I'm part of the team. I'm part of this company." I tried to respond, struggling to contain the anger and frustration choking me. But he was resolute. It was like the conversation was already over, and I was just one more item on his to-do list. "We're cutting all the fat, Monica, and you—" He paused, searching for the right word, then delivered the final blow. "You are the fat." I was speechless. He didn't even look me in the eye, dismissing me in a quick, impersonal way, as if my entire journey had no value. That moment summed up what he really thought of me. A replaceable part. But he didn't know. He didn't know what he had forgotten. He didn't know about the contracts. He didn't know about the audit records. He didn't know that, in the clauses he so carelessly discarded, there was a signature that held the key to renewing one of the company's largest deals. And not only that, he didn't know that without me, the gears would begin to fail. He had never read the fine print that I knew by heart, had never taken the time to understand what I knew, that without that signature, without my approval, suppliers wouldn't deliver. Clients would start calling, and the crises would multiply. In his arrogance, he believed he could replace someone like me with any intern brave enough to glance at the documents. But what he didn't understand was that when you don't actually read the contract, you lose control of the situation. And when you lose control, the machine begins to stall. And one forgotten contract would be the breaking point no one saw coming. 5 days. That's all it took for the consequences to begin unfolding. I knew from the moment the CEO's decision hit me that chaos would follow soon after. He thought the company could go on without me, but he was far from grasping the complexity of what I had built there. I moved on with my life. Spent the next few days away from the company, processing everything, trying to pull myself together. At times, a sense of relief would wash over me, like I had finally been freed from something I subconsciously knew no longer served me. But that feeling was fleeting. Reality would creep back in, like a quiet shadow. While I distanced myself from Delcor, my phone stayed silent. The work that had consumed so much of me now felt like a distant nightmare. But I knew it wouldn't last. I knew that soon someone from the company would call, looking for a solution no one else could provide. It was a strange feeling. I no longer had control over my future in the company, but somehow the key to solving their problem rested with me. I knew the Xander & Co. contract, the supplier crucial to keeping operations running, could not be renewed without my signature. That wasn't a personal whim. It was a clear, unchangeable clause. I knew it by heart. I had spent years building that relationship with Xander & Co., negotiating the terms, refining the details, ensuring everything was solid. The contract was strong, filled with specific requirements and legal safeguards that only I could ensure. And without my signature, it was worthless. The days crawled by, like a ticking clock counting down to the inevitable. But the call didn't come right away. Delcor's team, probably stunned, was still scrambling to deal with the consequences of the CEO's decision. But they couldn't keep that up for long. And then, on the 5th day, the phone rang. It was late, and I was sitting in my living room reading some book just to pass the time when my phone screen lit up. It was a number from the company. I knew who it was, and I knew what they wanted. I didn't hesitate to answer. I took a deep breath and said, calmly, "Monica Byrne." The voice on the other end was hesitant but tinged with urgency. It was Clara, Delcor's operations assistant, one of the few who had always treated me kindly. "Monica, we need you. Xander & Co. won't renew the contract without your signature. They said they'll only accept if it's from you." I leaned back in my chair, unsurprised. I knew this would happen. Xander & Co. wasn't just another supplier. It was the backbone of the operation. Without a renewed contract, the losses would be huge, and I was the only one who could save the situation. "Clause 732, I said, cutting Clara off as she fumbled for the right words. "Renewal only with my signature. You know that." Clara sighed on the other end. She knew there was no way around it, but also knew I had been dismissed cruelly, without even a formal farewell. "Yes, Monica, but the CEO, he's trying to work around it. He doesn't know what to do. Can you help? He's desperate. The whole company is at risk." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting her words settle. It was no surprise he was desperate. His hasty decision to cut everything without understanding how the company worked was now coming back to haunt him. That's his problem. I'm the only one who can fix this. And he knows it. I made it clear. There was no room for negotiation or alternatives. I held the key to solving the crisis he created. But doing so would require something he had never shown: humility. There was something satisfying about knowing that, even outside Delcor, I still held the only thing that truly mattered. My signature was more valuable to them than any job title or position of power. And in that moment, I realized the control he thought he had over me was nothing more than an illusion. Of course, he couldn't understand that. Not yet. The conversation went on for a few more minutes, but I already knew what I had to do. There was no more time to waste. I would sign that contract, not out of reconciliation or the hope of an apology he'd never offer, but because what was at stake now was far bigger than a signature. It was about the power he underestimated. The power of someone who knows every detail, every clause, every comma written to keep the company running. The power of someone who knows how to play the game. When the call ended, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was about to regain control of the situation, but before that happened, there was something he needed to understand. Who really held the reins? I wouldn't return meekly. I would return as the person he always ignored, but now needed more than anything. The answer was clear to me, even if the CEO hadn't realized it yet. In those 5 days, he had already lost control of everything. "Monica, we need to talk," he said, his voice artificially calm, trying to sound friendly, as if the humiliating layoff from weeks ago had been nothing but a misunderstanding. I recognized the number the moment my phone buzzed. I took a deep breath before answering. When his voice came through, I pictured his tailored suit, his hand scratching the back of his neck in that nervous gesture, and that look of his that avoided direct confrontation. He wasn't used to needing anyone. Least of all, me. "So now you know my full name, huh?" I replied, not bothering to hide the sarcasm. Every syllable carried the bitter taste of everything he had dismissed. Silence. The kind that betrays someone swallowing their pride dry. "Xander requires your signature, Monica. We're in a delicate situation," he said, with a strategic pause between words, as if urgency could be softened by ellipses. Delicate was a pretty word to describe the inner panic he was probably living. Xander and Cobus was the beating heart of Delcor. Without that contract, production would halt. And if production stopped, the board would come for him. I sighed, slowly. I wanted him to feel the weight of that pause. I let the silence give his insecurity the space it deserved. "And you want me to come back and fix it?" "Yes," he answered too quickly, then tried to soften it. "The company needs you." Oh, how time changes everything. From dead weight to critical asset. And it didn't take much. Just 5 days in a contract he never read. I felt a smile form on my lips. Alone in my apartment, a cup of coffee cooling beside my laptop, I realized that was the exact moment when everything turned. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight. I felt control. "I'll come back," I said firmly with calculated calm. But not like before. There was a brief pause on his end, as if trying to decode the subtext of my words. As if "not like before" were a riddle. "What do you mean?" he finally asked, his voice now tense. "Executive position," I began, savoring each demand like chess pieces in checkmate. "Direct access to the board, 4-year locked contract, no termination without cause clause, triple salary, profit sharing, full autonomy over contracts above $3 million. I could almost hear him choking on the other end. "That's..." he started, but hesitated. I knew his mind was scrambling through spreadsheets, trying to calculate how much it had cost to ignore me, and how much it would cost to keep me. "And one personal condition," I added sharp. "Which one?" "You're going to apologize to me, in front of the entire team, directors, managers, interns, right in the same place where you called me dead weight." The silence that followed wasn't surprise anymore. It was barely contained rage, pride being ground down slowly. He tried to laugh. That empty laugh people give when they don't know what else to say. "Monica, that's not necessary. We can handle this another way." "No," I cut him off. "You still don't get it. I don't need Delcor anymore. Delcor needs me. If you want me back, I come back whole. And the first clause of my return is the truth," said out loud. "Every single word of it." He swallowed hard, said nothing. The silence stretched. I could hear the muffled sound of the air conditioner in the background, the subtle click of a nervous pen tapping on the desk, the faint creak of a leather chair. Everything betrayed that he hadn't seen this coming. He thought a formal invitation would be enough, maybe a symbolic bonus. Thought admitting there had been a mistake would suffice. No, it wouldn't. Because the error wasn't just his. It was rooted in a whole culture that devalued those who held up the company's invisible foundations. He wasn't ready to deal with someone who now knew her own worth. "You have until 10 a.m. tomorrow to send me a draft of the new contract, with everything I asked for, and schedule the team meeting. If not, I hang up and I won't answer again." "Monica, 10 o'clock, no further discussion." I hung up. My hand was trembling, but not from fear. It was pure adrenaline, recovered pride, the pulse of someone who had finally understood her own power. I walked to the window. The city was still out there, loud, indifferent. But inside me, silence screamed something new. I was no longer just a piece on the board. I was the one setting the rules, because too much pride turns to stone, and he would have to swallow his. The following Monday, Delcor's lobby looked the same, elevators going up and down in sync, the muffled sound of heels on the marble floor, the receptionist smiling mechanically at those passing by. But there was something in the air, a dense silence, a subtle tension lingering among employees who, with curious glances and hushed whispers, sensed something big was about to happen. And they were right. I walked into the building like someone who already knew the end of the story. I wore a new blazer, tailored, in a deep wine tone that contrasted with the lightness on my face. My heels, elegant and steady, didn't hesitate on the floor like they once did. Every step was the sound of someone who owed nothing to anyone. When the elevator doors opened on the 17th floor, hearts skipped a beat. The murmur died. Everyone knew. They had heard the rumors. But seeing, truly seeing, the woman who had been dismissed as dead weight, now back, was something else. The meeting room was packed. Not just the contracts team, but also directors from neighboring departments, legal, finance, even 2 board members who rarely showed up. They were all there, with restrained expressions, a mix of shock, curiosity, and a certain veiled respect. And at the center of the room, him, the CEO. Tense shoulders, deep eye bags, slightly crooked collar. No longer the man in the slim-fit blazer with the MBA accent full of empty promises. Just a man trying to manage the wreckage of his own mistake. When he saw me, he hesitated, straightened up, then took a deep breath and said, "Before we begin..." His voice faltered for a second, but he recovered. "I need to publicly correct a mistake. A serious mistake." The room was dead silent. Not even the coffee machines made a sound. Everyone waited. He turned to me. And in that moment, for the first time since he arrived at the company, he really looked at me. Not as a cost, not as a problem, as a figure of power. "Monica," he began, his voice lower now, the weight of each word building like bricks. "When I got here, I thought I knew everything, that the company needed cuts, agility, modernity, and that people like you were replaceable." An uncomfortable murmur ran through the room. He went on. "I didn't just underestimate your importance. I humiliated you. I ignored your history, your contribution, your silent relevance. I called you dead weight, in front of everyone, laughing." He looked down, swallowed hard. His tone was almost pleading now. "And the truth is, since you left, Delcor has silently collapsed. The machine stopped. I had to feel your absence to understand your greatness. Xander refused to renew without you. No one could untangle the contracts. The department was lost. The man who had said any intern could do what I did now trembled in front of the entire team. So, I'm here," he continued, "to ask for your forgiveness, truly, in front of everyone. Monica Helena Byrne, I was wrong, deeply wrong, and I hope you'll accept my apology. Not for me, but for the company, which can't move forward without you." The room stayed quiet. Some managers looked away. 1 or 2 suppressed satisfied smiles. The HR director nearly widened her eyes. And in that moment, I let myself feel. I felt the taste of justice. Felt the weight of years of being ignored, overworked, undervalued, dissolve in that apology. It wasn't just a sorry, it was restitution. It was the universe handing me proof that I had been right, and he completely wrong. I walked forward slowly, my heels commanding attention. And without raising my voice, without rush, I replied, "Thank you. Not for the past humiliation, but for recognizing it now." He nodded, trying to keep his composure. But the room no longer belonged to him. I walked to my new desk. And this time, it wasn't the cramped cubicle where I'd started. It was a corner office with huge windows, city views, and a golden nameplate on the door. Monica Helena Byrne, Executive Director of Strategic Contracts. The office smelled new, of leather, polished wood, and freshly printed paper. On the desk, flowers from the legal director with a note. Finally, someone with brains and backbone in the right place. I smiled to myself. The smile of someone who knows her worth. Because now, no one laughed at what I did. And when you understand the game, truly, no one plays you anymore. You set the rules. You choose the moment. And when you return, the world stops to hear what you have to say. The following months were like watching a field devastated by winter bloom with the arrival of spring. Slowly at first, almost imperceptible, but inevitable. The dry land of Delcour's halls began to breathe again. And I was there, not as a discreet shadow in the back of meetings, but as the driving force, as the gear that turns and makes everything around it move. Right from the first week of my return, the contracts that had mysteriously stalled began to move. The suppliers, once distant and evasive, returned to meetings with renewed energy. Some even laughed nervously, saying they didn't know who to trust until they saw me back. Xander & Co. reversed its refusal in less than 24 hours after my official return, and that was just the beginning. Reputations began to be restored. Old partners started answering the phone again. Emails returned with the subject line in uppercase, "Urgent for Monica Byrne." But the most powerful thing was the respectful silence. That kind of silence that only appears when everyone knows there's someone at the eye of the hurricane, and that person is you. I restructured departments that had been dismantled with arrogance and haste. I recruited talents who had been discarded or ignored. I trained new leaders with a clear vision of efficiency and strategy, and I restored purpose to areas that had been running on autopilot for months. I revived buried partnerships, turned deadlocks into agreements. I brought in $2 million accounts, one from the pharmaceutical sector, another from heavy technology. Negotiations that the old legal team had labeled impossible, unfeasible, politically risky. I signed both confidently and without raising my voice. Board meetings began to change tone. Once ignored, I was now the first name called when the topic was risk, impact, or growth. The compliance department started consulting me even before sketching out any proposal involving restructuring. The finance team, used to cutting blindly, began listening to me before making any adjustments. "Monica, we have a delicate situation at the Rio plant. Can you take a look?" asked Marcelo, the new operations director, almost always with a notebook in hand and a hopeful look. "Monica, do you have a strategy to renegotiate the terms with Zarel? Their CEO requested your presence on the next call. They'll only accept with you," said Helena from sales. And the CEO? He was shrinking. A man who once entered meetings like he owned the world, now arrived late, distracted, his eyes avoiding mine as if not wanting to face his own guilt. The jokes stopped. That mouth that used to smile while calling me fat now trembled at any suggestion of organizational realignment. The catchphrases, the lean, the pivoting, the startup feelings, were replaced by silences and timid notes on his tablet. The arms that once flailed in the air during colorful presentations could now barely hold the pen in his hands. The event invitations disappeared. Internal supporters evaporated. His leadership unraveled like wet paper. Then, one day, it happened. It was a cloudy Tuesday, typical of April. I had just left a meeting with legal about a strategic merger. As I passed through the hall, I saw the chairman of the board, Vicente Olmos, speaking quietly with him, the CEO. They were side by side, but Vicente was speaking firmly while he kept his eyes on the floor like a student looking at his report card. Hours later, the email came, a dry subject line, executive leadership change. No public farewell, no affectionate announcement, just a note saying that he had chosen to pursue new professional paths. There were no applause, no speech. No one even held the elevator for him. He left through the same door they had sent me out of months earlier. But unlike me, he left alone. No faces in the glass, no hands raised, no voice behind him saying, "Good luck." And me? I stayed. Stronger, more confident, and more respected than ever. Now with my own team, ambitious projects, and a freedom I never thought possible. My desk was spacious, my name shining on the door. But more than that, my presence made a difference. Monica Byrne was no longer cost, she became structure. Director Monica, the meeting with the board will start in 5. They want you to present the plans for the new vertical, said Clara, my assistant, with a sparkle in her eyes. I'm on my way, I replied, adjusting the sleeve of my blazer and taking a deep breath. Not with pride, but with a rare calmness of someone who was discredited, and won. Today they call me Executive Director. A beautiful title, no doubt, but the real trophy isn't the position. The true reward is knowing that they tried to erase me, silence me, reduce me, and all they managed to do was shine an even brighter light on my name, because some people only function when they try to destroy us, and that's when we shine. Brighter, higher, and best of all, without asking for permission. And you? What would you do in my place? After being discarded, humiliated, treated as if my work were dead weight, would you have come back? Or would you have let everything fall apart just so they could finally understand the value you had? I know it's not easy. I've lived it. And honestly, there was a moment when I thought I wouldn't have the strength. But that's when I realized no one was going to write my ending for me. If I was going to return, it would be with everything, without lowering my gaze, without accepting anything less than I deserved. Sometimes life forces us to make painful choices. Stay silent or assert ourselves, pretend nothing happened or demand respect, return as before, or come back bigger. And I came back bigger. Because in the end, that was my true revenge, showing that what they tried to erase was precisely what shone the most. Now tell me, if it were you, what would you do? Would you accept the apology, demand your place back, or simply move on, knowing that those who knocked you down would never have the courage to lift you up? Leave your comment below. I really want to know what you would have done. And if this story spoke to you, if somehow it reminded you of your strength, of what you've already overcome, then leave a like and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any new story like this. By the way, click on the video that's showing on the screen now. It's another story of female revenge that will give you chills. I'll see you there.